And we are live on YouTube. We are live on YouTube. All right, I'm going to let everybody in. Good evening, everyone. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We're just getting started. Takes a couple of minutes to let everybody in the door. Welcome. Right. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We're just getting started. Welcome to everybody. It takes a few minutes to let everybody in. Welcome. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Welcome, everybody. Give it one more minute and we'll get going. Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losack. I'm co-founder, executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. This is our last of the January 2023 Renter Town Halls. We have 2 a month at least. We are the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy, and we welcome all of you. A couple of things. If you have any questions or concerns that you'd like us to address, please put them in the chat. We know that people use the raise hand function in the Q&A. Just put it in the chat. We will all be monitoring that. Tonight, we have several guests with us who will be going through a number of important issues. We are awaiting, I'm here, says Lori. Hang on a sec. There she is. All right, hang on. And we have another special guest who's just joining us. Again, everything in the chat. We will get through a number of areas, including the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, some remarks from a council member, Lori Ann Sales, when she joins us, and some remarks from our chair. Let me quickly introduce everybody who's with us tonight. We have Nicole Catravanos, the manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. We have William Roberts, the chair of the board of directors of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance, and also co-chair of the Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller Housing Transition Team, an important voice for renters on the state level, and of course, always an important voice for renters in our region. Council member Lori Ann Sales, who's the new at-large council member, and our staff, Pat Beckham, Malek Demir, and David Mullins, who will be monitoring the chat and making sure that questions and concerns are addressed best we can. If we don't get to all of them, we'll follow up later. This Renter Town Hall is being recorded and is on YouTube. So if you miss any of our precious words, you can hear them again on YouTube anytime you like. So with that, let me turn it over to my friend and colleague and the chair of the board of directors, William Roberts, for some opening remarks and maybe a little bit of an overview, if you will, on what is happening at the state level with the Moore-Miller administration. Will?
Certainly. Well, thanks, Matt, and good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you again for the first time for me in the new year. Really excited to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Moore-Miller transition as it relates to housing. So as Matt said, I'm pleased to be a guest tonight, Matt, even though I'm home. But as Matt said, besides being the chair of the Renters Alliance, I'm happy to join you on behalf of the Moore-Miller transition team to talk to you a little bit about the housing portfolio. And so the Housing Policy Committee is one of several of the policy committees that Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller organized their policy transition around. And our role, like most transitions, is to take the policy platforms that candidate Moore and Miller ran on and translate them, into the policy pieces that Governor and Lieutenant Governor Moore are going to be working with their administration on in the first 100 days and also the days to come. And so I'm one of 3 co-chairs on our Housing Policy Committee, along with Miranda Darden Williams, who is the executive director of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition, and Ruth Ann Norton, who's the president and CEO of the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative that does a lot of work, particularly around lead abatement in homes, but also a ton of work on affordable housing finance and tenant issues as well. And joined by a really great group of folks spread across our 4 work groups, which are removing barriers, which is where our tenant protection issues fall. And I'll talk a little bit about what some of those discussions have looked like. But under removing barriers, also talking about combating redlining and racial discrimination in appraisal values. We have an affordable housing group that's working on all things affordable housing. And so whether that's the expansion of affordable housing for seniors, talking about affordable housing financing and preservation, those kind of issues. So smart growth and community development group, as well as a climate and healthy housing group. And, in our work, really, as it relates to tenants, the conversations that we've been having as we form the transition memo, which we're working on right after this meeting. I'm going to hop back into another meeting as we're trying to finalize that in the coming days since the administration's going. Jake Day, Mayor Jake Day of Salisbury, has been named or designated as the incoming Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development. He's done a lot of interesting and exciting work in Salisbury on housing issues. And from the conversations that I've had with him in our transition, I think will prove to be a ready and willing ally and partner in the state Department of Housing and Community Development for our issues. And so I'm excited about that. But so just for context, some of the conversations we've had are conversations that we've had here, right, about really reformatting and rethinking the way that state government works on issues when it comes to tenants, that the prism through which I think we can safely say that the Hogan administration looked at these issues and dealt with them will be rapidly different and markedly different, rather, from the way Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller deal with them. And, it's a realization that the way that Marylanders are housed has changed, right? We know that the rate of Marylanders who rent their homes has gone from about 23% to nearly 40%, which tracks where we are in Montgomery County, by the way. and that number is going to keep increasing. Where that rental housing is no longer the stop to home ownership. It is a way that people have chosen to live and be housed, and so we have to not think about it when we in the policy perspective as sort of temporary policy solutions, but permanent solutions that are about affordability and stability. And so particularly as we look at the way that all of our populations, seniors, folks on fixed incomes, et cetera, are dealing with the affordability crisis, right? We know that sort of protections are pretty non-existent, and that there's the rate, the sort of unbridled, unabated rate of rent increases without protections like things that we've been working on, like just cause eviction and the like, leave people really with few options. And so that's the context that we've been talking about, sort of some of our policy discussions there. And I think the one interesting thing is that the state is, and we all by virtue of being here, is in an interesting position because through the pandemic and the influx of federal funds, which were used, as we know, for emergency rent relief and the like, the state's gone through a period of money where a lot of funding has been pushed through. And I think there's a realization of folks who may have not been paying as close attention to this issue as folks like us who do it every day, just about how big the need was, right? That the influx of millions and millions of dollars of federal funds in the door and out the door to counties, realizing that all the money that came through, for instance, was not enough, and still not enough, right, to meet all the need out there, I think has been sort of a wake-up call across the board for folks just about how massive the scale of issues are. And so, a lot of the things that we've been talking about recommending are ways, for instance, the governor can work with the legislature on some of the policies that we've talked a lot here about, but also looking to make sure that either in partnership with partnership with the Attorney General's office in particular and others, that we can, from a consumer base, look at ways to work to stop landlords from taking advantage, for instance, of illegally taking advantage of the court system for some evictions, figuring out how we fully fund the right to counsel legislation that was passed last year. And we've had a really robust conversation about what it looks like to be thinking about statewide standards for everything from how to make sure that we're supporting organizations that do direct outreach to renters, to teach them about their rights and help connect them up with services, to helping figuring out how to back them up, as I said, to get defenses in court, the right to counsel, and other things. Conversations about security deposit recovery, and the standards conversation has been great or not great in this case, because as we talk to folks around the state, it is very, very evident, right, that to call what we have a patchwork of rules and regulations around renter protections would be sort of modest. So there are some places like Montgomery County, through work of organizations like the Renters Alliance and others, who have renter protections etched in law, and then there are some places that have very minimal. And so we think it's important when you have a pro-tenant governor to be able to try to work across the board to strengthen safeguards as much as possible. So both through a policy lens, but also through a bully pulpit lens, and to really be, I think we're hoping and hopeful that Governor Moore and Secretary Day are going to be really entrepreneurial and figuring out what are the sort of executive tools at their disposal. Maryland has, I think that Maryland has the most powerful chief executive in terms of the executive authorities that the governor can wield, if not the most, one of the most across the country. And so we're really hopeful that they're going to sort of rip the top off the can, or whatever euphemism you want to use, to be able to go deep on all the policy protections that we can get in place. And so it's been conversation about funding, which is always an interesting and difficult one because there's never enough funding to meet the need, right? And as I said, where we are at this place in the COVID post-COVID world, and I know this mirrors a conversation the county council had the other night, as they're about to go into the budget season, that we've been in an area of expansion. As I said, we've got all these funds able to do a lot, although not meeting all the needs, and we're gonna be moving back to some sense of normalcy in terms of having a normal budget flow, which means not as much money as we had to go around at issues. So
hey, Will,
yeah.
Council member Sales is juggling a couple of meetings.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry, Lori.
I'm going to flip my role.
I'm happy to
this,
kick it to her. Yeah.
And just say,
Let me listen.
Thank you for being our voice in the transition team. There is no one who could do this better, and no one knows this stuff better. But as council member Sales is with us, and since you've heard of her before, would you be kind enough to introduce her to our group?
I'm happy to. And I'm sorry to hold up my friend here. So Councilmember Lori Ann Sales is a really good friend of mine, going back far too long. I won't tell you how long, because then you'll know how old we are. But Lori, as Matt said, we're not too old. That's right. So Lori Ann was elected to the county council at large, as Matt indicated at the top. What's most notable, of many notable things, is that Lori Ann made history when she was elected to the county council. So it's the first African-American woman elected at large to the Montgomery County Council. And she was also, in her previous service on the Gaithersburg City Council, the first African-American or first African-American woman, or both.
So first African-American woman elected countywide, and then first African-American elected in the city of Gaithersburg.
That's right. So Lori Ann is our history maker for sure, but longtime friend of the Women's Alliance and of Tenet. So happy to have you, Lori, and I will stop talking and turn it over to you, because I know you got a lot going on.
Lori, now's not the time to go on mute. Councilmember Sales, come back.
Yes, I'm back.
We live in the Zoom world. We understand. We rock and roll.
Yeah, so I'm in Annapolis. Today was the first in-person meeting for the Maryland Association of Counties. I serve on the legislative committee. I did the same as a member of this city council. So I'm really happy to be able to represent the council on decisions that come before the state, issues ranging from tax policy to any number of issues that impact local government's authority and even our ability to raise taxes. So glad to be able to be here with you all this evening to talk about such an important issue. As Chairman Roberts mentioned, I am a huge fan of the Renters Alliance. It's an incredible resource to our renters. Having been a former renter and then serving at the city council to advocate for renters who didn't feel like they were getting their fair share or getting the response they needed from their landlords, it's great to have this partnership and someone I can call on to assist in those efforts. And so, we're going to be talking about this at the county. We talked a lot about affordable housing during the campaign trail. We know that the county, before we were all elected, passed a few measures to stabilize rent. They were temporary measures. These measures are closer to 4.5 to a little under 4.5%. I do know that the advocates are asking for a 1.4% goal. I just know that in speaking with my colleagues and speaking with a widespread stakeholders, something more similar to what Councilmember Oriata has introduced in Prince George's County at a 3% rent increase for a 6-month period, may be more realistic. I came to Montgomery County as a resident, single mom living in affordable housing. So I know how important affordable housing is to our renters, especially our low income earners, ensuring that, if you have access to affordable housing, you can manage a myriad of things. Making sure that you have stable housing and you're not worried about the instability of rent increases and having to move unexpectedly, especially where everything is high because of inflation. You don't know if, the landlord can, reject you or deny your application because of a lease or a credit check. And so right now, the priority is to keep residents housed and to create policies that help residents become self-sufficient to manage rent rates on their own, and also work with the market to control costs. The benefit of serving on the council is advocating for this increased investment in building affordable housing. For years, we've heard complaints from the developers, from the nonprofit and for-profit developers, that projects that take a year in other jurisdictions are taking 3 to 5 years in Montgomery County. And we're wondering why we are at an over 40,000 housing deficit in Montgomery County. So I'm glad that my colleagues are listening to, the pleas from the residents. We see the emails that are being sent in with people getting upwards of 20%. So, there is now planning housing and parks meeting that's going to be happening on Monday. I was just talking to Chairman Vice President Friedson. He talked about the agenda and the folks that'll be on that panel to testify and, help us have an even more robust discussion. I know the Renters Alliance will be represented at that meeting. We're going to have representatives from CASA. The Office of Legislative Oversight is also going to be presenting information about the impact of inflation and costs for the landlord and the feasibility of expanding this temporary rent increase, and also helping us understand what the market constraints are to provide a number. There's quite a few pieces of legislation. The county executive has a rental stabilization bill. He hasn't included a number, so we have an idea given regional and national numbers. I know California's on the 10% end, but here in Montgomery County, we're hearing advocates plea for a 1.4%. And so as a member of the Health and Human Services Committee, and we have senior aide who's going to be staffing the Planning and Housing and Parks Committee to really understand what the full discussion is. And I know that we have enough legislators at the dais, regardless of what's recommended in this 3-person committee, it's going to come to the full 11-member council. And so the most important opportunity is for advocates to share their concerns. Matt's going to come in and he's going to have his data. He's going to have, his All his
My
information
data
ready.
is Will Roberts. That's who's coming.
Oh,
He's
good.
gonna
So
be
Will's
sitting, he's gonna
coming.
be at my elbow. But between the two of
All
us,
right.
we just might be able
Awesome.
to pull it off.
Okay.
Oh,
Very good. So we got like the strongest advocates in rental housing in the county right now. And so I think your support of sending in letters to help, further expand the conversation and back them up on the importance of this and, anything that you can do to help, make sure that we hear from our renters and the council members understand that this is a true issue for renters and not just a headline grabbing issue will help us, get to an actual progress, because that expiration date's coming soon. The money is running out from ARPA. And so, there's very few things that we're going to be able to do. And with budget season starting in March, time is of the essence. And so I hope everyone here understands the importance of, these next few weeks and gets their positions together. So thank you so much for having me.
You know it.
Give us a call. My senior aide, Ezra Pine, is on for a few. And so if you have any additional questions, he can answer them, or we will be available for follow-up. And I just want to thank everyone for being here this evening and making sure that the county understands how important these issues are to our residents.
Well, Councilmember Sales, we are honored to have you as always, and we are thrilled that you are on the council and that you have experience as a renter and that you're a thoughtful person and a fair-minded person. We have our own views on rent stabilization. We've been at this for over a decade and a half. And we certainly know the pros and cons. At least there are no cons from our perspective, but we know the objections to it. And we have answers to those objections. We're working with our allies. We have some differing opinions, but all of it is toward the same direction of having a stabilization program that balances the interest of a landlord to maintain their profits, not necessarily increase them, but maintain them, keep up with reasonable costs that relate to managing their properties, and balance the interest of stable, affordable housing, which if we don't have it, we got to figure out what the costs are for unstable housing. And they are both social, humanitarian, and financial.
yes.
Yes.
So we thank you for coming.
I would also, of course, and also
I
be
hope
on the
that the
lookout.
poker game and the scotch behind over your shoulder are part of your
Is that a
your
pair of
evening.
kings? Looks like a
Part
pair
of
of
your
kings.
afternoon in Annapolis. It's perfectly understandable. But we all wish we were there.
Good night, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Have a
Thank you
great
so much,
evening, everyone.
Councilmember.
I hope
We
Thank you for
appreciate it.
coming.
shots were taken.
You betcha.
You're good. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, well, with that, Will, did you have any further remarks of what you were saying?
No, I mean, I think I know we got a lot of rocking and rolling, doing some other issues, but I'm glad that Councilmember Sales was able to join us and to talk about some of the real-time work that's going on here in the county at the council level as these discussions get underway about long-term stabilization. The only thing I would add in the tie-in to some of the conversations we've been having on the transition is that we have for the past 2 or 3 years had a hyper focus on rental issues and the emergence or the continuing of an affordability crisis in the context of the COVID emergency, right? Which it was and is. And I think it's really important that from a policy perspective, but also as we're talking about this, as Councilmember Sales indicated, and as the governor is thinking about, I think that we are firmly thinking about the difference between what it means to respond to these issues in an emergency fashion. So that's what I was talking about, right, with the huge influx of federal money, and from a long-term, perspective of just a simple policy fashion, right? Like these issues, because they are so emergent for so many communities can no longer just be treated with solutions
Temporary.
that you would throw at temporary solutions, right? That you would throw at an emergency. And so we got to be thinking about long-term stability, not just in the term of rent stabilization, but yes, there, but also as we're looking at rental housing policy across the board, thinking about what permanent policy solutions look like, not just temporary ones. So I'm glad you made that point. And as you said, Matt, I know we have viewed, fully engaged in that conversation with allies and with members of the council when it comes to what's going to happen on stabilization, and have some views that I know we're going to share out pretty soon.
Yeah, you mentioned an important point that needs to be underscored, that while there are emergency actions that from time to time need to be taken, it has always been the Renters Alliance view that housing is not a common commodity like beer and cigarettes or fancy shoes, whatever the market will bear. And if you can't afford it, tough luck. It's far too important to the overall health, welfare, and prosperity of our communities to allow it to be unstable, especially as unstable as it is now, with, as Councilmember Sales points out, double-digit rent increases that are pricing people out of their homes, and more so. I'm loath to say it, but I say it often enough. We are seeing the forced migration of working families and low-income families from our communities. And I don't know where they're going. And I don't know what we're going to do with our workforce if they go. And so we have to start thinking about what it's like to implement rent stabilization and what it will be like if we don't. So, and what it will cost us if we don't. People really just haven't really understood the importance of housing stability as a central public policy issue instead of one on the edges of the discussion. And thanks to you, Will Roberts, our board chair, bringing it back to center stage with the new administration. Very, very important. We have a voice there. And Lorianne Sales, our councilwoman at large, and others on the council for the first time, making the possibility of a rent stabilization program passing the legislature, the council, a reality. We're not overconfident. It's going to be an uphill climb. But it's for the first time got a little daylight. And with that, Will, if there's anything else, I'll be ready to turn it over to our other guest, the manager of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, totally.
All
totally.
right, then let me just say that one of the other brighter lights or hopeful lights is that the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, is also bringing in new blood. It has a new deputy director, Scott Bruton, who'll be joining us in future meetings. It has a new director of development, housing development, Nathan Bovell, I think if I got that name right. It has a new code director, Tamala Robinson, and it has a new manager of the Officer of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. That's a lot of new blood, but what comes with that is open-mindedness, innovation, a willingness to look at approaching enforcement and housing policy with fresh eyes and fresh ears. So with that, we're delighted to have with us it's a lawyer who got roped into this job, Nicole Catravanos, the new manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. Nicole.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Matt. And I will say, with all the new people coming in, we're having lots of meetings. There's lots of ideas. We're very open to listening to our community partners, who essentially are the voice of the community, to address concerns and proposing, not only just proposal of legislation, but also proposal of how internally we can do things differently within our departments, or the offices within department, to best help the community. So, I have weekly meetings with the Renters Alliance, a number of other community partners, and we have a lot going on, but I just wanted to reiterate that it's important for us to stay engaged. And at the end of the day, we are an arm of the community. So I think I'm excited to maintain that relationship and see how it continues to evolve. I think you wanted to talk a little bit about COVID rent relief, Matt?
Yeah, if you have any updates from your vantage point, that would be helpful. As everybody should know by now, the program, COVID rent relief program, the last phase 4, not that you need to know, but the last phase of the program The portal for the applications closed on January 13th, Friday, January 13th. They're not accepting any more applications. But we know that there are many people out there who have been denied. There are many people who have not been processed yet and haven't heard back. So people are a little bit confused. Nicole, you have as much knowledge of this as I do. In the meantime, I'll be looking at or David, if you could, one of my staff, look at the Pulse report and post that, which might give our attendees a little bit more updated information.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate for those who have applied and have been denied funds under the COVID Rent Relief Act to please reach out to HHS Housing Stabilization Emergency Services, because there are other funds and other services to complement and to provide assistance for individuals who may not have qualified for the COVID rent relief. And DHHS does work in collaboration with other organizations that have funding. So if they can't provide assistance, or if they can only provide assistance in the portion, they can reach out to other entities to try to see what other resources there are. So please contact 311, ask for Housing Stabilization Emergency Services, and as for those of you who do have pending applications, DHHS has said that they hope to be able to go through the pending applications in the next month or two. And once they've gone through all the applications, they'll make an assessment as to whether they're going to reopen or not. And that's all based on how much funding they have left. And the last I heard, they had approximately 15 million. So to be continued.
By the way, that's, if I may, Nicole, that sounds like a lot of money, but they also have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications still to get through.
Right.
So it's
They've
not like
only
it's sitting
reviewed-
not sitting around.
They reviewed 65% of the applications the last I heard. So moving on to the next subject, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs and the department and the changes that we're seeing. We, as many of you, if anybody here on the line has a pending application with our office, we provide a number of different services. First, the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs provides information. So if you have any general questions, you want to know what to do in your situation, you want to know how the law applies to you, what the law covers and doesn't cover, you can call us via 311, ask for the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, and we will give a call back within 24 to 48 hours. One of our investigators that's very well versed will call you back and respond to any of your questions. In the alternative, you can send an email. The email address is olta, O-L-T-A, .intake@montgomerycountymd.gov. I recommend if you have any documentation that relates to your question that you attach it to the email so the investigator can review that documentation as well and give you a comprehensive answer. And again, we do respond within 24 to 48 hours to email inquiries again as well. If you have a question regarding maintenance of your property, and if your question is only regarding maintenance, then you can always contact code enforcement. When you have a maintenance issue, your responsibility as a tenant is first to inform the landlord. We always recommend that you document the way you inform them, if it's via an email or via text message, then give them reasonable amount of time to fix it. And then after that reasonable amount of time, depending, it can be 30 days, is usually more than reasonable for a non-emergency situation. If they do not respond, if they do not fix the problem, then please contact code enforcement. You can file a complaint online, or you can also do it via 311, and code has a pretty quick turnaround on sending an inspector to go assess the property and go from there. If in addition to having an issue with maintenance, you have an issue with your landlord, if you believe your landlord is harassing you, or if you believe that the ledger doesn't reflect what you've paid, or if you are received a notice to vacate, you can call our office, you can email us, and if after having spoken with somebody in our office, you've been recommended to file a complaint, please do so. You can always just file a complaint on your own as well. And if you do that, we always recommend that you provide a copy to the landlord to give the landlord some time to review it and see if on their own initiative they want to remedy whatever allegations or disputes you guys are currently having. As far as our process, once a complaint arrives in our office, I review it and I assign it to an investigator. An acknowledgement letter is sent out, and in that acknowledgement letter, you are informed of who your investigator is and their contact information. And then the investigator moves forward with essentially investigating the case. They will contact both parties, they'll ask questions, they'll gather documentation. And then the next step is to schedule a mediation. All our mediations are currently being conducted via Zoom, but if technology is an issue, we can always facilitate that here in the office. We have, cameras and computers and whatnot. And many times, a great deal of the time, our mediations are fruitful. And when they're fruitful, it results in a consent agreement, and that consent agreement is signed, and our office has the ability to enforce that consent agreement. If it's not fruitful, then it goes to the Commission of Landlord-Tenant Affairs. Our commission is a body made up of all volunteers. Some of the volunteers are tenants. Some of the volunteers are either property owners or managements or associated with property management. And some of the volunteers are just members of the community at large. And these are individuals who are trained to hear these hearings. The commission will decide if they're going to take jurisdiction. And if they do, then we assign a hearing date. Right now, our hearing dates are about 3 months out. And then we have a lot of materials here in the office. The investigators usually provide a pamphlet on how to prepare for your hearing. We are aware that there are many individuals that aren't in a financial situation to be able to pay an attorney. So the pamphlet guides you as to what the steps are and what to expect at the hearing. And it helps you prepare, and the investigator is also there to answer any questions so you can best prepare for your hearing. And after the hearing is held, which is also held on Zoom, the panel of the commission will issue a decision and order. And again, that has the same enforcement of law as if it was issued by a judge in the district court. And either party can appeal the decision. If they choose to appeal, they do have to post a bond for the amount that's awarded in the decision order, and then it goes to the circuit court. That's general the process and the services we provide. Things have been a bit hectic in the office, so we have been a bit short-staffed. We have a new investigator that's starting at the end of the month, and we have put in requests for additional staffing, which we hopefully will find out with the next few years if we'll have additional staffing starting for fiscal year 2024. So
You'll find out in the next few years or the next few months.
Oh my goodness, the next few months.
Just helping you out. Just helping you out.
Thank you. So, there's a lot. If we're able to get, even just having one additional investigator, but if we're able to increase the staffing, it's going to help a lot with the processing times for our complaints. Because I think it's important to manage expectations. If you are thinking of filing a complaint, my investigators have up to 90 cases each. And it's challenging when your caseload is so high to be able to provide the urgent attention that a lot of these cases need. So we're doing our best. If you have a case that's pending, and you feel that you haven't received the attention that you need, please contact me directly, and I will follow up directly with your case. But I do want to manage expectations that it can take a couple of months until you have a mediation. And after that, after the mediation, usually within a month or two, it's presented to the commission. And because we have about 3 months out, it could then be another 3 months until you have your hearing. So, if your case isn't successful with mediation, and if you're waiting for a hearing date, it can easily take 6 months to have a hearing date.
If I could throw in, Nicole, if I may, one of the Renters Alliance has been working with the county now for over a decade, and one of the services that we provide is an extension, if you will, of outreach for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. And in this role, one of the things we could do, and we help Ulta with this, is be able to work with you before you get to Ulta. So we can advise you, whether this is something that can be resolved without having to file a complaint. There are lots of strategies for resolving many issues that renters face before we start to escalate. And so we can help streamline those issues that need to go right to Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, or to code, or to something more, even more serious. Or we could tell you, hey, here's a better way to approach something, and we can help you. We could go talk to a property manager with you. We can advise you on what to say to a property manager or a landlord. We can advise you what the law is in basic ways. We're not lawyers, but we certainly have played them on TV, and we've been doing this for a long time. So we understand certainly what we would consider sort of the community housing health clinic is what we are. So come to us if you're not sure. You don't have to go nuclear first. This is what we're here to do. We have staff who are expert in this, and it will go through us. And if necessary, we will guide you to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs or Code when it becomes necessary, and thus relieving the Department of Housing and Community Affairs to focus on the most serious cases.
Thank you, Matt. I also, there are situations where tenants fear retaliation. And I think it's important for us to address that concern and that fear, because it's very real. And essentially, it prevents tenants from accessing their rights. And, maybe in the future, we can have a more in-depth conversation about this, but you can always reach out to Renters Alliance first. You can always call us informally to gather some information regarding what your rights are. If retaliation is a concern, and specifically in situations where you think that maybe you're not the only person whose rights are being violated, but that this is maybe an institutional practice that's happening, please talk to us about it. We have measures to be able to open what's called an administrative complaint, and your name wouldn't be involved. It would be the office that would file a complaint against the property owner and the management company regarding whatever the situation may be. So I just encourage people who have any questions, any concerns, or any fears to please reach out to Renters Alliance. Please reach out to us because where there's a will, there's a way. So we've had situations, already where Renters Alliance has brought a few things up to our attention, and we've been able to address it, some more expediently than others, but communication is key. So thank you, Matt. Thank you for saying that. And just trying to think if there's anything else off the top of my head.
This is because you have to do this over and over and over again. You probably forget to do it, but I'm going to ask you if you would you please walk us through the eviction process again so that people know.
Sure.
We have so many people who say they have to be out in 3 days because they got a threatening notice. That is not true. And you are an expert in this, Nicole.
Yeah. So the eviction process varies based on why the tenant's being evicted, but there are some similarities and steps that need to take place no matter what type of eviction is underway. First and foremost, the tenant always needs to receive a notice from the landlord. If it's a failure to pay rent eviction or filing, then they will receive what's called a summary ejectment letter. It looks very formal. It looks like it's from the court, but it's not. It's actually from the landlord. And it essentially tells the tenant, you've been late or you haven't paid rent for these amounts. This is the total amount you owe. If you don't pay it within 10 days, we're going to file against you in court. And there should be a page there with a number of phone numbers and organizations that you can reach out to for assistance. In a failure to pay rent case, then after it gets filed, you will receive something from court letting you know that you have a case filed against you, and eventually you will receive a hearing date. If it's another type of eviction, which is usually a tenant holding over or a breach of lease, a tenant holding over is when the landlord has opted not to renew your lease. They've provided you a 60-day notice. And at that point, the tenant has essentially overstayed, and that's why it's called a tenant holdover. After you've received that notice, then they can file in court, and then the same thing will happen. The court process triggers, you get a notice from the court with a hearing date. The other types of notices has to do with breach of lease, and landlords have the option of giving, I think it's a 14 or 15-day breach of lease notice or a 30-day breach of lease notice. It depends on how drastic is the breach of lease and what kind of implications it's having with security and whatnot in the property. Regardless, you have to give you a breach of lease notice for either of the two situations, and then they have to file in court, and then you have to get a hearing notice from court. When you receive your hearing notice from court, always attend. You can reach out to Renters Alliance. They can put you in contact with organizations that provide legal services to see if they know of any legal services that you may qualify for, and they can refer you. Even if you don't have an attorney, go to court. If you're going to court on a failure to pay rent case, you have, and let's say you paid your rent, or then you should bring proof that you paid rent. Ideally, bring 3 copies of whatever proof that you bring. 1 copy is for the judge, 1 copy is for the attorney of the property owner, and then 1 copy is for yourself. You should always check in with the clerk when you arrive to let them know that you're present as well. Similar with a tenant holding over or a breach of lease case, if there's any evidence you have to defend yourself, you should bring it to court. If you received a tenant holding over notice, and you think the notice doesn't look right, you can contact Renters Alliance, you can contact our office. We can go over the notice with you to make sure that the notice is lawful, because by law, the notice requires certain content. It has to have the date that you will receive the notice. It has to have the date of the eviction or the date that you have to move out. It has to have a phrase that has the contact information of the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs and more. If that notice isn't lawful, then essentially the tenant can use that as a defense on the date of the hearing, so that the case can get thrown out and dismissed. And basically the landlord then have to reissue you a new notice and then take you to court, and it buys the tenant more time. In failure to pay rent cases, I'm going back to failure to pay rent cases, if you've had issues with the maintenance of the property, we always recommend that you follow rent escrow immediately. There's a district court help center on the 2nd floor at the Rockville Courthouse. They can walk you through the rent escrow forms, what documentation you need to prove. And it basically tells the judge, I haven't paid rent, but the reason I haven't paid rent is because I've had all these issues. I've informed the landlord, they haven't done anything about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay rent to the court until the court assesses the situation and then tells the landlord to fix the problems. And once the problems are fixed, then the court gives the landlord their money. And there's a whole bunch of alternate resources. When you do a rent escrow, you can ask for the rent to be reduced during the time period that you had to live with these maintenance issues. You can ask to get out of your lease if you want to get out of your lease. You can ask the judge multiple different things, and the district court help center can go in detail as to what options you have. I highly recommend, every good attorney will tell you, document. So if your defense on a failure to pay rent case is that there's maintenance issues and you need to make sure everything is documented, you have to demonstrate that you informed the landlord, that the landlord didn't fix it, and how it impacted your life and your health and the well-being of yourself and anybody that may be living with you. After you have your hearing day, if things don't go in your favor and a judgment of possession is entered in favor of the landlord and against you, at that point, the eviction still doesn't happen immediately. The landlord needs to file another document that's called a warrant of restitution. That document then needs to be granted by the judge. And then that document goes to the sheriff, and the landlord has to schedule an eviction with the sheriff, which right now is not happening in a very expeditious way. I don't feel comfortable giving an exact timeline for that, but it's not even happening 1 month out. And after the date is scheduled, you will receive what we call a red and white notice on your door from the sheriff's office, letting you know that you're on their eviction list. If you contact the sheriff, they won't necessarily tell you the date that the eviction is scheduled, but they will, if you ask them, is it scheduled before X date, they will say yes. And many times, if you contact the landlord directly, the landlord would also share that information for you. If your eviction is a result of a failure to pay rent case, you have up until the day of the eviction to pay the judgment amount on the judgment that the judge signed. So let's say your failure to pay rent judgment is for the month of January and February, but let's say you also haven't paid March and April. You only have to pay the amount that's on that piece of paper to be able to stay. So if you can get your finances together, if you can get assistance from other community organizations, if you're getting assistance from DHHS and you can get your money together, you know, you can always inform the sheriff that you're going to be present with the funds, so they're also aware, and paid to be able to stay in your home. In the alternative, if your eviction is as a result of tenant holding over or is as a result of a breach of lease, usually there aren't many remedies for that. The only situation is if, for example, there's some kind of disability or there's some kind of health condition that would jeopardize the health or create a very unstable situation for the tenant. You can communicate that to the sheriff. I highly recommend that you get in contact with some of the legal organizations that provide assistance like HPRP, and they can potentially assist in extending the period that you can stay in the property until the eviction is followed through.
Okay, so to recap, let me just do the streamlined version. Remember, you might get a notice from your landlord or the landlord's lawyer saying, get out. That's just a threat, but it has no force of law. They can say, get out in 3 days, get out whenever. They have no force of law. The next thing they have to do is give you a 10-day notice of summary ejectment. That's the formal notice that in 10 days they intend to file with the court. They file with the court, you receive a court summons with a court date. You go to court, if you adjudicate or have a defense, and you don't get a judgment against it, then that's fine. If you get a judgment against you, the next thing is the landlord has to file a warrant of restitution to get the property back. That could be the next day, it could be a month, as Nicole points out, we are varying times. But when he or she does that, then that notice goes to the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office will schedule an eviction and post on your door a red and white notice that says, warning, you're soon to be evicted. It should also come with information. If you find yourself in that situation, please reach out to us. We can guide you, let you know whether or not you do have a defective notice, do have a false summons, have a summons that's already been dismissed, and so on. One other thing I'd like to point out, Nicole, in the details is that if you've had 3 judgments against you for failure to pay rent in a 12-month period, the landlord could file to foreclose your right of being able to pay it down. So if you've had 3 judgments against you, not 3 summonses, 3 judgments against you in a 12-month period, that could make it more difficult. You need some advice, you want some general guidance, the Renters Alliance is here to do that. If it's more specific, especially if it's dangerous legal advice, we'll probably refer you to the Homeless Persons Representation Project, HPRP, or Maryland Legal Aid. If it's the usual escalation of a complaint that the county has jurisdiction over, we'll refer you to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to escalate the complaint and seek their enforcement. And as Nicole points out, generously, even though they're very busy, they're also available to answer any questions that we would be able to answer. So, seek their guidance and advice and know your rights. I think we should also, David or Pat, can you find the 2023 Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs Landlord Tenant Handbook? Let's make sure we put that in the chat too, so people can read up on their general rights and best practices as a tenant. Pat or David, what do we have in the chat for questions or concerns? for
Nicole,
either of
can
us?
we have a question here about surcharges, monthly surcharges. We have a renter who went from a year lease to a 60-day lease. And her landlord charged her a monthly fee of $200. They recently raised the fee to $250 per month.
What's the fee for?
They recently, when I objected, I had been responsible. Well, she just saying what she was, but the property manager said there is no limit on what they can raise the amount monthly to.
So I'm going to say some general comments, and then I encourage, I think her name is Miss Nancy Young, to
Yeah.
email us with the more details of her case.
Okay,
At this point, landlords can increase the rents. There's no cap on how much they can increase rent. They can only do it once every 12 months, but there's no limit on the rent. Now, as far as fees, I need more details to what type of fee this is.
mhm,
We have been seeing Rentals Alliance brought this to our attention, and other individuals have as well, that some landlords are charging fees to pay the rent every month. So
Yeah,
when they're
this isn't
paying-
that.
Yeah, that's not the
This is-
situation.
This is not the, what is happening, I believe, because we've seen this before, is that the renter does not want to sign a 2-year lease. They don't want to sign a 1-year lease, but the options that are available to them, that if they sign a month-to-month or a 60-day or something like that, comes with a $350 VIG, vigorous debt, as they call it in the mafia. So it is basically a kind of way to say, hey, look, we want you to stay longer. And if you don't, you want to sign a shorter term lease, we're going to charge you a fee or an increase for that. It seems extremely unfair to us, but we believe it's legal to do so.
Well, if I could
As
just
long
throw
as
in-
they allow for a 2-year lease option.
Well, this sounds like a 60-day one, but when your lease ends and you get defaulted back to a month-to-month lease, that's where I've talked to a lot of people that a fee was incurred just for being automatically defaulted back to a month-to-month lease, like a surcharge on that.
Well,
Which-
that's a question. If you do not actively choose to go 60 days or month to month, and the landlord does not renew your lease, and you automatically go month to month according to state law, if they don't renew your lease, then Nicole, I guess they would call if it's a one-time fee, I'm not sure about the legality of that. But
In
if it's
terms of the
$350
lease.
more in your rent, it's just an increase in your rent.
No, so if the lease doesn't get renewed and you go on a month to month, it's just the same terms of your previous lease apply at your month.
Yeah.
So if you're reapplying, and then when you reapply, you're asking for a shorter term, and as a result of that reapplication process, they're making you pay a fee, we need to discuss that. Send me the lease, because we have contacted landlords sometimes and made them justify that amount. And many times they can't. And if they can't, then they end up reducing it or waiving it. So please, Miss Nancy Young, send us an email, send us your documentation, and we can look into it for you.
And Nancy, if you get the $350 reimbursement, you owe me something.
But, just to let you know, we're going to look at it for you in more detail. And then more than likely, the next step would be to file a complaint and then go through our formal process.
Right. What else do we have, folks?
I just want to say to one of the renters who is complaining about roaches and things in the laundry room, that is a code issue. You need to get in touch with code and file a complaint and go from there.
But let
And
me just say,
again-
Pat, that they should contact the landlord or property manager
Oh, yeah.
first.
Sure.
Now, remember, we have seen a lot of property managers and landlords be very abusive and irresponsible, but we never want to not give a responsible landlord the opportunity to do what they do, which is to promptly, responsibly address concerns and maintenance issues of tenants. If you don't give them that chance and you go directly to code or landlord tenant, it's just not fair.
Yeah,
And the only thing landlord and tenant or code is going to come back to you and say is, why didn't you ask them to do it? As soon as we asked them to do it, they went right ahead and do it. So process is you identify a problem, bring it to the landlord or the property manager first. If they're not responsive, then it's time to escalate.
And always try when possible to document that communication.
mhm.
Yeah, your landlord wouldn't let you move in with a handshake. They have documentation, so you should do the same thing. What else do we have?
Nicole, have you heard of any state or county bills to seal or expunge eviction records during the COVID period?
There are some state bills that are being proposed that covers a sealing. They're called sealing of cases versus expungements, because expungements usually have to do with criminal.
Okay,
And right now, I don't remember all the details, but the District Court Help Center is helping individuals fill out forms, I believe, for failed to pay rent cases that have been dismissed to get them sealed as well.
This one comes up frequently about rent increases. You can only have your rent increase once in a 12-month period. After the rent has been raised, it cannot be raised again for another 12-month period. If you sign a 2-year lease, and Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, if you sign a 2-year lease, the 2-year lease should say what your current 12-month rent increase or no rent increase, whatever it is, for the first 12 months and what the second 12 months is going to be. Has to be, so you'll have an idea. Could be 2% this year and 20% next year, but whatever it is, it has to be in the 2-year lease so that you could see. We recommend seeing a 2-year lease, signing a 2-year lease if you intend to stay a while or permanently, because it increases your predictability. The 2-year lease requirement is something the Renters Alliance worked on years ago to give tenants a measure of predictability in rents. It's not everything we wanted, but it's what we could get back in 2016. So yes, they could raise your rent 3% the first year and 12% the second year or whatever. Of course, we're working on rent stabilization. So hopefully if they pass it with everybody's participation and agitation, they won't be able to raise either year's rent more than a reasonable amount. But right now, that's the way that works.
and for anyone getting excessive rent raises, please send them to Alta, Nicole Petveris. They are keeping records of trying to figure out the excessive rents in the county. So they are interested in your increases. So send them to the county, and that will help with their record keeping.
And
I
when you
just put
send that
the email in the chat. Yeah.
when you send that email, ideally, please attach the rent increase notice. 1, for our documentation, and 2, so we can review it to make sure that it's lawful. Because similar to a notice to vacate, rent increase notice have certain requirements for them to be lawful. And we're currently working with the Office of Legislative Oversight to quantify and qualify the data that we're receiving regarding rent increase. I was doing it for a short period of time, but my capacity was very limited. So it's helping to kind of create support essentially for the county exec's proposal. There's also a state bill that was proposed, Matt, I don't know if you saw it, that required 120-day notice for any rent increases. I think it was above a 4%. So that's something.
I have not seen that. Do you know who's proposing that?
I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I can share that information with you later.
No, in Montgomery County, Nicole, why don't you, I'll add to what you say, but can you go through what's required in a renewal notice?
In a rent increase notice or
Yeah,
a rent
a rent renewal notice.
Yeah, we had a question about a rent increase and whether notice is required for a rent increase, and it seems like y'all are very covering a lot of that. But yeah, whether it's 60 or whether there's 60 or 90 days required for a renewal notice or increase notice would be helpful. I don't know which.
So we'll address both. Rent increase notices have to be 90 days. And
Prospective.
Excuse me?
Prospective.
Yes, and they need to be in writing. And it has to state, I'm a little dusty. It has to say what your current rent is, what your future rent will be, what the percentage rent is, what the percentage increase is, and I believe it also has to state the voluntary rent guideline
Correct. And your department.
and our information.
Right.
So again, if that rent increase is faulty, you know, we can contact the property management company and have them remedy that. And we can also have them remedy it at the entire level for all the tenants, not just for your specific case.
And the other thing that we fought for is that renewal notice has to offer you a 2-year lease option. And if it doesn't contain all of these legally required elements, it's what's known as a defective renewal notice. The bonus for those of you who received defective renewal notices and didn't know it, and have been paying an increase for 6 months or 9 months, that increase, if enforced, has to be credited forward to you, and they have to reissue the renewal notice with the proper elements and start from zero again, 90 days perspective. So it is worth it to take a look at your renewal notice and make sure that it is legally formatted.
So you're talking about renewal notices. Renewal notices now are 60 days.
It's I think it's 90 days. According to Bill 1915. If the renewal has to be, the increase has to be 90 days perspective. I'm not sure if it separates the renewal from the increase. I'm not sure why it would.
Is it if there's no increase? Is that what you're saying? It would be
If
different.
there's no increase, is it only 60 days? That would be weird.
So you can have a rent increase without a renewal. And you can have a renewal without a rent increase.
Oh, good.
Which I always enjoy. A good renewal without a rent increase. That's helpful. But no, no, exactly. Within a year, the one time, right, can be raised.
Yes.
Time in that year. Gotcha.
I have to get better on that. Let me, while you all talk amongst yourselves, but I'm gonna look.
We had the only other question I had was about, I mean, I feel like the shielding came up, but someone had a question about whether a pending eviction affects your credit. That was kind of that was how it was worded, and I don't know if they meant whether there was.
Even if you paid it, they want to know if it makes a difference whether you paid it up before you were evicted or at both.
I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong and I can look into this, but I believe that once you have a judgment against you, that it does. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
And I can look into that and follow up with certainty.
I'm not sure I understand what Corky is saying. Can the landlord post notices in colored envelopes on tenant doors? Does it make a difference what color the envelope is?
It does not.
No, okay.
But I think I've heard Matt say before that they can't, the landlord at least, not if it, the court can put your summons on there, but the landlord can't be posting public facing, information about you on your door. I think I've heard that before, but.
Yeah, notices to vacate and failures to pay rent shouldn't be for the public to be able to access and read. So they either need to be facing inward or they need to be in an envelope. That's correct.
Okay, I am racing through Bill 1915. I do see that if they want to terminate the lease, they have to give you 60 days notice if they're not going to renew.
Okay.
So 60 days notice at the end of the lease. But I'm still not sure about the 90 days, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, in practice, the renewal and the increase come together so often that even though, but if they're completely legally divorced, that's interesting. And I appreciate you pointing that out because it's that would make sense then. Like that it was that where there were different notice periods.
Well, we can also make that our homework.
Yeah.
We also had a question earlier about whether there are any concerns about that the fact that the county rent relief is ending And I mean, we are certainly concerned about that. I mean, we're getting y'all's calls who are in the process and denied the process, or, you know, have received it, but are still having, you know, issues. And so we want to just at least recognize that. And that we certainly, when we talk to the county and other officials, are having those conversations about, we're still talking to people in need and bringing that up. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to comment on that. I just wanted to acknowledge that I saw that earlier.
Mhm. Nicole, can I add, just for clarification purposes, there is a separate rental assistance program that we've always had, aside from COVID. There is there, I guess this young lady wants to know, can she apply for rental assistance for being just 1 month behind? I would just tell her to apply and see, you know, if it's possible. I don't know.
I don't know all the ins and outs of the housing stabilization program and what the requirements. I know that they do prioritize if there's an eviction pending and you can put documentation. You can provide documentation. I would encourage them to go there's 4 different offices for housing stabilization, and go in person and speak to somebody.
Mhm.
Because as I said before, the county has a process where if they don't qualify for their funds, that they can refer them out
I see.
to
Mhm.
see if they can get assistance from other funding.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
And then I was just, I had some background here, so I'm sorry if it got said already, but I'd always want to point out at this moment that the certain municipalities have their own funding for
Mhm.
rental assistance, Gaithersburg, Rockville, and Tacoma Park. And so definitely contact their own, you know, individual separate social services about that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
if you live in those jurisdictions, absolutely.
Mhm.
So just reading the law here. It says, section A, 2954 rent adjustments, notice requirements. A landlord must not increase the rent until 90 days after the landlord gives the tenant written notice of the increase. A landlord must give the tenant at least 3 months written notice before an increase of more than 100% of the rent increase guidelines. A landlord must not impose more than 1 rent increase in a 12-month period. We know that each written rent increase notice must contain the following information, and we went through that already. So I guess the law is saying, and a rent increase notice is a renewal notice. Because you know, otherwise, why would you be increasing the rent? So if you're increasing the rent, I suppose your renewal needs to say for what period of time. But if you're increasing the rent, it has to be at least a renewal for 30 days, if not more. And so it'll be interesting to hear the interpretation of that. If they don't, if you go automatically month to month, you can't increase the rent. But if you increase the rent, our argument has always been, if you increase the rent for any period of time going forward, that you are renewing the lease for a period of time. And therefore, the other requirements of what should be offered in a renewal should apply.
Yeah, but if you have a rent increase notice that doesn't have a date on it, or doesn't have options for period of time for extending, then it just increases it for the following month, for the days after the 90 days.
So, but aren't you in effect, I mean, listen, if the landlords can say your tenant holding over the day after your lease expires, and you're not holding over, aren't you renewing for a period of time?
You're not tenant holding over the day after your lease expires, only if they've given notice to vacate.
Yeah,
So
Well,
you're
that's
on
what,
a
that's what I meant.
month-to-month.
That's what, if they can do that,
if
then
they
why
increase the
couldn't-
rent, well, if they
So
increase
the landlord technically can do the following, and I think this will give some clarity. In January, they can give a rent increase notice saying 3 months from now, we're going to increase your rent. And then in February, they can say, actually, I don't want this tenant anymore. If the lease is over, if the lease is a month to month, and file a tenant holding and give a tenant holding over notice for 60 days.
in 60 days.
So if somebody's on a month to month In January, they can say, I'm gonna increase your rent in 90 days. And then the following month, they can change their mind and say, actually, I want to end this month to month, and I'm gonna give you a tenant holding over notice. And you having provided that original rent increase notice in January doesn't guarantee an extension of your month to month for 90 days. I mean, I don't think it happens very often. We're talking about very nuanced situations, right?
Well, it's happening more and more, frankly, with landlords who are choosing instead to go month to month, give them more flexibility to kick tenants out, unfortunately. So it's something definitely to look at because the increased notice, each written rent increase notice must contain the following information: the amount of the monthly rent immediately preceding the effective date, the amount of the monthly rent proposed immediately after the rent is increased, and the percentage increase of monthly rent, the effective date of the proposed increase, the applicable rent increase guidelines, a notice that the tenant may ask the department to review, other information that the landlord deems useful in explaining the rent increase, and otherwise valid notice of rent increase is not valid, blah, blah, blah. So it sounds like a renewal notice to me.
But well, no, but except it was missing the language. It said nothing about continuing your stay, which is why whether it's just cause eviction or another way, I mean, there's these holes in the law that like really don't just allow for the month to month. As someone who's just looking for a renewal but is month to month, like it definitely is good to hear this discussion about how these are two different legal things, because it's coming up more. I think the hypothetical we had is pretty rare, but
and there is
non-renewal thing is
nothing,
pretty,
there's nothing once a tenant is on a month to month, there's nothing that can force the landlord to give them a long-term lease.
Or whether they're month to month or not, there's nothing that forces the landlord to provide a renewal.
Well, now, and if I could throw in
Right.
real quick, we had a question about HOC. Now, if it's an HOC owned property, though, there may be some right to have a cause stated to non-renew, or if it's a LIHTC property, a tax credit property. But no, we had a question that was said, what's our relationship with HOC as the Renters Alliance? But I didn't know if we wanted to comment on, there can be, if it's an HOC owned property, there could be.
My relationship is, quote, evolving. There is a new executive director and there are new staff there, and we have some relationships there. We understand HOC. We've been working with them for a long time, and we understand some of these challenges, and hopefully, like many things, including DHCA and the county government in general and the state government and HOC, things are evolving and people are recognizing that housing is a whole lot more important than it used to be perceived. So we'll leave that there. What else, David?
The ones I had written down got asked. Pat, do you have any other outstanding questions here? I haven't read through.
Well,
I saw one. Sorry,
there are
Pat, I saw one about retroactivity.
Yeah,
If you've got a lease that you signed that you think was faulty or something's wrong with it, bring it to our attention. We'll give you some first level advice on it. And if it's more serious, we'll tell you where to go. Go ahead, Pat.
no, I think we pretty much answered. Some of these questions are, things that we can't really answer. The law is the law. So, if those are rules that we have to follow as well as you, the renter, I wish we could change them, but some of them, it just is what it is.
The landlord cannot rescind a lease in the middle of a lease unless they file for breach of lease. So breach of lease means that you didn't follow the rules of the lease that are within the law, that you behaved badly, damaged the property, did something that any Judge Judy would say, hey, you're not supposed to do that. You can't live in this apartment building if you behave like that. If the landlord files a breach of lease against you, then they can evict you in the middle of a lease. Otherwise, your lease protects you for as long as the lease is in effect.
Correct.
Right.
And again, you still have to go to court. And many times, some of the breaches of leases can be remedied. So if it's a breach of lease because there are more people living in the occupancy that's listed on the lease, You might have some time to be able to relocate some of those individuals if it's a breach of lease because you have a pet and the property doesn't allow for pets, you can relocate the animal. So some breaches of lease cases can be remedied, and if it's remedied by the date of the hearing, then the case will be dismissed.
Mhm.
On the 2-year lease thing, again, we recommend that if you intend to stay for the long term or want to stay for the long term, that you look at a 2-year lease. The landlord has to provide the first year's increase and the second year's increase in what they offer you. So it's not like you sign a 2-year lease with a surprise increase in the second year. You're supposed to know that when you sign the 2-year lease, what the second year increase is going to be. So if they give you a 2-year lease and they're only going to tell you the first year and say, we're not going to tell you the second year till we get there, let us know, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. Okay, well, it looks like we're in the last couple of minutes. I'm going to give it staff, anything quick?
I mean, I'll just reiterate, since we have the question, what are the common reasons for non-renewal of a lease? That, the way our law stands right now is that there's no reason that needs to be given for non-renewal of a lease. And that we've been told that needs to be changed on the state level. So that's where to advocate about that if you don't think that sounds just. But we see them, say things like, financial reasons, of course, like if someone's been behind. But they're what they can't do is not renew if it's retaliatory for someone who's been asking for services that they should have, like maintenance, or has been organizing tenants. If they decide to not renew for those reasons, you're going to want to reach out to legal aid or someone, because that's definitely currently illegal.
Or to us, we can advise you on that. It is very difficult to prove, but we have been fighting for just cause eviction protection legislation for as long as we've been in existence, and we were formally put in existence in 2010. Our board member, Delegate Janelle Wilkins, is championing this legislation in Annapolis, and we will keep you informed on its progress. Obviously, we think it's extremely important. A landlord should not be allowed to not renew a lease without a stated justifiable reason. So there we are. Manager Nicole Katravanos, do you have any last words for us before we close out?
No, just thanking everybody for their time, for being here, and to please visit our website. We have tons of materials and educational information on the website, and to encourage people to email us again at olta.intake@montgomerycountymd.gov with any questions they may have and any documentation that's pertinent to those questions.
Thank you, Nicole Katravanos. Always a pleasure to have you with your expertise. I will give this last announcement on Sunday at the Silver Spring Civic Center from 4 to 6 p.m. The Renters Alliance will host its first in-person renter community meeting. Because of COVID, we've been denied the ability to do this for a long time. Our special guests will be County Council member Kate Stewart, who is also an expert on a number of things, former mayor of Tacoma Park, but also an expert on rent stabilization, but our newest county council member, state delegate Janelle Wilkins, who's on our board, and as I mentioned before, is championing Just Cause. We'll also have representatives from the Montgomery County Police Department, from the 2nd District, and from the 3rd District, Silver Spring, to address some of the crime and safety issues we've seen in apartment communities. But we'll cover a whole bunch of things in this meeting. There'll be light refreshments as well, but join us, Silver Spring Civic Center, Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. Everyone is welcome. And with that, thank you, Pat Beckham. Thanks, Malek Demir, who wasn't feeling too well, so she decided to take some rest, but we thank her for joining us. We thank David Mullins, my staff, and all of his 55 kids who are screaming in the background during our town hall.
And
good luck with that.
And people remember, if you get a summons,
there he is.
go to court.
There he
Do not
is.
miss the date.
Right, kids, pets, and apartments. It's quite a combination. Anyway, with that, everybody, thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.